Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to this third podcast, which I'm recording on behalf of the UK North Blind Sailing Association and the Royal Mersey Yacht Club. With me today is Charlotte Quinn, who will introduce herself shortly. If after listening to Charlotte you're inspired to take to the water, you can find out more from the club's skipper David Owen on 07793 543 529. That's 07793 543 529. And we'll give you that number again at the end of the podcast so that you can take it down. Now, before we get started, we better confirm, Charlotte, people can hear your voice now, that we are actually socially distancing.
We definitely are socially distancing, yes, Tom. Yeah.
We're on a bench and we're kind of more than arm's length distance from each other, aren't we?
Correct. So no worries on that score.
Fantastic. That's really, really good news.
Yeah.
So, Charlotte, perhaps you'd better start by introducing yourself literally as the ferry's coming into the pierhead.
Yeah, hi Tom. I'm Charlotte Quinn and I'm a volunteer crew with the UK North Blind Sailing Association. So I've been volunteering with them for about 5 years. I've been sailing for well over 25 years. I've sailed on the River Mersey in a squib for about 20 odd years and been with the association for about 5 years. So I have a day skipper qualification and a yacht master qualification, and I'm also the vice Commodore at the Royal Mersey Yacht Club. So I coordinate the sailing activities for the sailing club, and that means that basically I think a pretty good mix of our experience to join together both the Blind Sailing Association and the Sailing Club so that we work well together. I think it's a pretty good complementary mix.
You mentioned there that you're a Commodore. That sounds very important. You better explain what that is.
I'm Vice Commodore. It's basically, I coordinate the sailing activities, oversee coordinating sailing activities for the Royal Mersey Yacht Club, and the club ties in with the UK North Blind Sailing Association. So the two, the association and the club, very much work alongside each other and complement each other. So the club provides a support network, if you like, for the association, which enables the association to go out sailing on the river safely.
So what are we going to talk about today then? What are you hoping to get out of this podcast?
Okay, what I'd like to talk about today is basically getting the boat ready on the water so that we can launch and sail. And I'd like to talk about some of the basics of actually sailing on this river.
You'd better keep it basic for me because, as you already know, I know very little of sailing, I'm afraid. So shall we get into this?
Yeah, great.
OK, well, I think the first question that Captain David Owen has suggested that we discuss is how do you get the sails up?
Once we're all safely on board on the Milne, and there's generally 3 or 4 of us on board, there tends to be 2 sighted people, a sighted helm and a sighted crew, and then generally 2 visually impaired crew as well. So when we're safely on board, we take the cover off, which protects the boat from the weather, and we get the sails out. So the sails are always taken down when we finish sailing and put up when we start sailing. And what I mean by that is we don't leave the sails up on the boat when we're not on the boat. So they're stashed underneath the foredeck of the boat. So the first job is to get the sails out, and then generally it is a sighted helm or a sighted crew who will go to the fore of the deck, which is basically the bow. So the bow is at the front and the stern is at the back. So we'll attach what's called the jib sail, and that's the sail at the front of the boat. We'll attach that, and then we'll get set with the mainsail. Now the mainsail is the biggest sail, and that's attached to the mast and the boom. Now the mast is the big wooden sticky up thing in the middle of the boat, and the boom is the horizontal piece of wood that comes out of the mast. So you set the mainsail within the boom and the mast. So when we've got it all set to go and we're all happy, generally it's the sighted helm and crew but also any visually impaired people who can and will help will tug on the sheets and the sails will go up when we're happy with the direction of the wind and the tide. Safety is absolutely paramount, and there is a lot to learn. There are a lot of terms, and I'll try and keep it to the basics. You tell me when to stop if I'm warbling on too much.
Don't worry about that at all. You mentioned their safety, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes' time.
Yeah.
But one thing I do know is that on every boat there is a crew. Talk us through, if you would, who's in the crew, what do they do?
So far as the crew are concerned, they are there to listen actively to the orders of the helm. The helm is in ultimate charge of the boat and will steer it and tell you where you're going and when we're going to do a manoeuvre or what have you. The crew will have an allocated position, so you know where you are. Now, as I said, the sail at the front of the boat is called a jib, and attached to that jib you have two ropes. Now, you never actually refer to a rope on a boat. You've got either sheets. Now, the sheets are attached to the jib sail and the mainsail. So you will have a crew member on either side of the boat with one of the two jib sheets that are attached to the foresail. And when ready to do a manoeuvre, when you hear the helm saying go about or whatever the command is, then you'll either, as a crew, you will either pull on the jib sheet or you will let it go. It is tied off, and we will explain very carefully, if you've not done it before, how a jib sheet is tied off. There are actually no ropes as such on board a yacht or a boat. So you have the sheets which are attached to the jib and the mainsail, and you have halyards. Now, halyards are the ropes that are attached to the jib sail and the mainsail, which make them go up and down. And it tends to be the sighted people who will predominantly haul on them, but we always encourage crew to get involved too, because we also need extra weight. And so as crew, you can do as much or as little as you're comfortable with, and everything will be explained, and it can be explained 10 times. It doesn't matter, just so long as you're comfortable with what you're doing. So basically you'll have your place in the boat, and when you're told to do something, you do it.
When you're told to jump.
That's it. Or if you're told to duck, you duck.
When I said jump, I didn't mean jump in the river.
Absolutely not, no.
What would the visually impaired crew members be doing generally? What are their roles overall?
You'll be allocated as a visually impaired crew on, say, a jib sheet, one on the left, one on the right. Now, another nautical term I'll just briefly mention, you've got port and starboard, which you've probably heard of before.
Even I know what they are.
It gets confusing because it's port for red, because you pass the port, the red wine to the left, and then you've got starboard, which is green, which is to your right. So you'll have a visually impaired crew, and when told to do so, they will either pull on the sheets or let them go. And also, so far as the mainsail is concerned, which is the big sail at the back, there are some other running rigging sheets which help to make that go faster or slower. And so, likewise, the visually impaired crew can be on either port or starboard to help the mainsail be set properly. And depending on the level of visual impairment, it can be that you can have a visually impaired person on the helm sometimes. For example, I can remember we went sailing at the Menai Straits Regatta a year or two ago, and we had a blind veteran sailor who was a fantastic sailor, had his own yacht, and he was able, when the time was right, to take over at the helm. So it depends on the individual as to how much they do. It's up to them what they're comfortable with, and it's working together as a team, basically. And
blind sailors, though, they can make a really important, significant contribution.
Completely, absolutely. It's really not appropriate to be sailing a Milne with two people. Really, you need 3 or 4 people. So by the very fact that you've got the visually impaired crew on board, it makes it possible to go out sailing.
Now, we mentioned earlier safety arrangements, and inevitably I imagine there will be procedures in place.
Yeah.
Could you talk us through what they are, how they operate?
We have on board one, sometimes two VHF radios, so always there is VHF radio communication between the milne that we're sailing on, the yacht that we're sailing on, and the Royal Mersey Yacht Club committee boat, which has the overall task of coordinating the sailing, the racing sailing on the river. So always there is that communication there. Also, there is a safety boat, sometimes two safety boats, which are manned by Hugh, the boatman, who's just a superb boatman, and he works with the Royal Mersey Yacht Club, and he's always on standby if he's called on the radio to come to do whatever is necessary if help is needed. And the other boats sailing with us, around us, everybody's keeping an eye out for each other. Ultimately, we've also got Marine Fire Rescue at the pier head, and we've got the RNLI. So if worst came to worst, and it won't happen, but there is an awful lot of help out there, an awful lot of structure, and we only sail by the rules. So safety is paramount.
Now, one thing that's always fascinated me, and I've watched quite a few sort of yachts over the years on the television, or maybe on the side of a river or something along those lines, never fully understood how they move, how they turn, how they stop.
Right.
So, I'm a complete novice.
Right.
How does all that work?
Okay, it's quite complicated, but let's try and keep it to the basics. And it's handy if you have in your mind north, south, east, west. So north going upwards, south downwards, east, west, left, right. And also think of a clock face. So you've got 12, 3, 6, 9 o'clock, which ties in with the north, south, east, west. Now, when you're sailing, it's all about the wind and the tide on the River Mersey. We've got obviously a very strong tide, which affects us enormously. Everything's governed by the tide, and likewise, it's the wind that we have to use as well. Let's say we're setting off from Rock Ferry, and we're going to head towards Liverpool, towards the pier head, the Liver buildings. From Rock Ferry, that essentially is north. So that's 12 o'clock. And we will, to get to north, we will do a series of manoeuvres called tacks if the wind is kind of coming from the north-northwest. So we will have the wind coming over the boom, and we'll either be on a port tack or a starboard tack. So we'll be sailing towards the wind, but just off it, because if you sail directly into the wind, you'll literally, quite bizarrely, you will come to a complete halt. You won't go anywhere. It's quite odd. Now, the term that we use is sailing close to the wind. So if you can think of you're sailing almost like 12 o'clock, but just off it, if the wind's coming to you at 12 o'clock, but you're just off that direction, say you're at 11 or 10 o'clock, then you'll have the wind coming over either the port or starboard side of the boom. So you'll be close to the wind. So you'll be making a series of manoeuvres, respecting the tide and the wind, heading up towards the pier head. Does that make sense?
Kind of does. And does this relate to the points of sailing?
It does, because you've got a close reach, you've got a beam reach, you've got all sorts of different technical terms, and it can get very confusing. And I'm appreciative of the time that we have, and I don't want to lose everybody in all of these technical terms. But we have, if you're going towards, if you've got the wind coming at you, if you think the wind is directly in your face, then you'll be caught what's called close hauled, and you'll be either going on a port or a starboard tack. So you'll just be nudging up, gently making these manoeuvres towards the wind. Now, if you want to bear away, if you want to go away from the wind, you'll go on to what's called a beam reach, which is another technical term, and that kind of means that you will have the wind basically coming over onto the side of your boat, and it's quite a fast point of sail, and you use the wind to go faster or slower, or to to go in whatever direction you want. And the funny thing is, you can use the wind to stop as well. So do you want to move on to stopping?
Yeah, let's talk about stopping. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, stopping it's quite a skill when you haven't got a motor in a boat, if you think about it. Because you've got the tide, which can be running very fast, and you can have wind, which can be quite powerful. So you've got to basically depower your sails. So if we say, for example, we would just want a bit of a rest, and it's a really windy day, and we just think we're going a bit too fast, or we just want to catch our breath and just take stock of where we are, then if we point into the wind, so the wind is right on our face, okay, right on our nose, as we say, the boat will stop. Now, if we are going to go back onto our mooring buoy, and we're going to, look at putting the boat to bed and go home, then we will basically, when we approach the mooring buoy, then we will take, for example, we can take down the mainsail whilst we're still sailing. So we've only got the power of the wind in the jib. So the boat will go a lot slower. And as you nudge towards your pickup buoy on the mooring, you've got less power, which will mean that you won't, hopefully, over jump your mooring buoy. Hopefully you'll be able to just depower enough so that you can reach out and pick up that pickup buoy. Of course, the other thing is you have, for example, an anchor. Sometimes there is no wind, but on the river here, on the River Mersey, you've still got the tide, and you can think, oh God, we're not going to go anywhere today. So you could basically start to try and sail from Rock Ferry, and you think, oh, there's no wind. But before you know it, the tide is taking you off down to New Brighton. You think, blooming heck, how am I going to get back? And it's a bit of a tricky one if you haven't got a motor. So sometimes you'll drop your anchor to stop you going anywhere. But if you haven't got any power, say, for example, you're in that scenario, that situation where there is no wind, then we can always think, well, we've got Hugh, our boatman, and if we need to, we can radio Hugh, and he will come and he will pick us up. He will lash our yacht to his boat, and his boat has got a motor on it. So that's the fantastic news, that ultimately we've got him.
There's quite a few technical terms there, and I imagine sailing generally is quite a technical exercise.
It is.
How long does it take for people to become proficient sailors?
You can be safe sailing on the river after a few sessions of theory, classroom learning about it like this, starting to get to know about things by listening to somebody talk. But once you've been out several times, then you can feel safe enough to, have real confidence.
So for visually impaired people who are thinking of getting involved, the atmosphere would be supportive, and the recognition that it takes time to learn everything you need to know.
Totally. I think for visually impaired people, if you've never sailed before, do a few of these podcast type sessions, and maybe a bit of online, or just talk to the blind sailing. So come and meet us at the Royal Mersey Yacht Club and talk to us there when it's safe to do so, and then come out with us. And after 2 or 3 times, I know that you'll feel confident and feel safe to come out on the river.
It sounds great. I wish I had the courage to do it, Charlotte.
You will.
I'm going to be forced to, I think.
Oh, that's a given.
Well, look, Charlotte Quinn, thank you very much indeed. Now, I gave a number at the start of the podcast, and I'll give it again. The person to contact if you want to find out more is David Owen, and he's on 07793 543 529. That's 07793 543 529. Give David a call, and he'll help you with the signing up process. Charlotte, enjoy your sailing when you're able to do so.
Thank you very much. Cheers.